You have devoted your life to developing vaccines that save lives here and all over the world. Why did you make that choice at I guess, a relatively young age?
Yeah, I mean, ever since I was a kid, I wanted to make vaccines. I thought this was one of the highest expressions of science for humanitarian purposes. And so I did my MD and PhD at Rockefeller University, used to be the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research and Cornell Medical School, and actually started making a hookworm vaccine for a parasitic disease affecting hundreds of millions of people. Now, 40 years later, that vaccine is in phase 2 clinical trials and looking really good. So the point, and then we turned that program around to COVID and made 2 low-cost COVID vaccine technologies that reached 100 million people in India and Indonesia, providing proof of concept. You don't have to be a big pharma company to still do big things. And that was always part of the plan. I'd always wanted to make vaccines for the world, and that's what we're doing. I think the unplanned part was having 4 adult kids, including Rachel, who has autism and intellectual disabilities. And if you remember, that was the original assertion from anti-vaccine groups, that vaccines cause autism. And then I'd written the book, Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism, that unfortunately made me public enemy number 1 or 2 with the anti-vaccine groups, but it also gave me a front row seat to this whole thing.
And it did, and there's something many people who may have seen you on cable TV, other venues, don't know, that you didn't just show up when the pandemic happened. You've been working on vaccines before, but also you've dealt with the kind of anti-science you're talking about now. And in the book you write, you made a decision. If I don't stand up for vaccines, who will?
That's right. And it started, with Rachel. I said, look, here I am. I'm a pediatrician. I'm a vaccine scientist. I'm making vaccines for the world. I have a daughter with autism. I can explain why vaccines don't cause autism, and really go into a deep dive into this. And I felt, look, there was a vacuum. Nobody else was speaking out, and felt compelled to do it. And I find it meaningful to be able to convince people of the importance of getting vaccinations and why vaccines are safe and effective.
How did the reaction to that book prepare you for the pandemic that came just a few years later?
Well, it started, because a lot of these anti-vaccine groups, what they were doing was they were monetizing the internet. They were selling phony autism cures, nutritional supplements that nobody needed. They were selling anti-vaccine books on Amazon. If you go to Amazon.com and type in the word vaccination, it's almost all anti-vaccine conspiracy books. So I began interfering with the bottom line. This had become a part of the health and wellness industry, and I was hurting the business line, and so they were very aggressive and started targeting me. But then something else happened, which was about 7-8 years ago, maybe because we were taking some of the wind out of the sails around the phony baloney around autism. They got adopted by extremist elements of a major political party, of far-right extremism here in the United States. And so now it wasn't just going up against non-governmental groups monetizing the internet. This was actually going up against major political forces. I mean, I had Steve Bannon publicly call me a criminal, which was pretty extraordinary, and that sort of thing.
And was that the time when you first met Robert F. Kennedy Jr.?
Well, I started speaking with him back in 2017 because if you remember, after when President Trump was being inaugurated, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. came out and said he'd been appointed the head of vaccine commission. So I got contacted by the leadership of the National Institutes of Health, said, look, Peter, you have a daughter with autism, you can explain why vaccines don't cause autism, would you mind please talking with RFK Jr.? We'll have it moderated by a third party. I said, sure. And started having a series of discussions with him by phone.
All in private?
Yeah, all in private with the third moderator. And I would do long walks and on cell phone. Sometimes my wife would be listening, Ann would be listening. And they weren't very productive, unfortunately. He kept on moving the goalposts. It was, first he said it was the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine that caused autism, then thimerosal preservative, then it was spacing vaccines too close together, then aluminum vaccines. Then he'd go on a tirade about HPV vaccine for cervical cancer and other cancers. He said it was causing autoimmunity or, all this stuff. And so you wound up, I don't know what the metaphor you want to use, playing this kind of pair game of whack-a-mole. You knock one down, another one would pop up, or always moving the goalposts. So it became an exercise in frustration, probably for both of us.
And then just this past summer, He's back again in your life. Joe Rogan offers, what was it, $1 million?
And now he's running for president, right? And so, yeah, that
But to debate him on Joe Rogan's show, you refused. It became kind of a media feeding frenzy.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd second guess about what happened this summer and how it affected you and maybe your cause?
No, I mean, I think, well, there were two reasons for not debating him. One is, for the reasons I just said, that it was an exercise in frustration. He wasn't interested in listening. He didn't want to follow the science. And, he would just keep on making up new things. And so that was a source of frustration. But the other point, which for me I think is very important, I think it would send the wrong message for young scientists. Because we have a way of doing science, right, that works, that's been very effective. We write up our findings, we submit them for peer review, they undergo major revision, sometimes it gets rejected, we present our meetings at scientific conferences in front of our colleagues who give us critical feedback, same with grants, and it's a system that's worked for over 200 years. It's not something that's up for debate. I can't think of any instance where we've really advanced science through a public debate. I mean, you had historically, Einstein talking to Niels Bohr, which were two colleagues that respected each other, engaged in a public discussion, but not really a debate. We don't debate science. And as I like to say, you debate 18th century Enlightenment philosophy about Rousseau and Bishop Berkeley, or you can debate politics. But science is not something to debate, especially with someone who has no special knowledge or qualifications.
And yet there are many people who have no special knowledge and qualifications who are very eager to debate, to make a case. They could be lawmakers, they could be your neighbor next door.
I'm always happy to have a public discussion. I told Joe Rogan, I've been on his show before. I'm happy to come back on and have a discussion with him, but not to pretend that this is something up for debate.
And yet you have people go to their doctors. I read on WebMD, or I saw here, I saw there. How do scientists, doctors, other people in that field deal with that?
Yeah, it's hard. Well, WebMD is not so bad, but but all of the conspiracy sites. So now you've got a situation, and they dominate the internet, right? I mean, that's if you type in the word vaccines in any search engines, you get mostly the wackadoodle now rather than the real science. And so it's tough for physicians in practice or other healthcare practitioners, because people come in downloading all this stuff, and the physician or the healthcare practitioner is like, well, gee, I never heard that. Though you're made to feel like you're not keeping up with the literature. You are keeping up with the literature, but you're not keeping up with the phony stuff, with the nonsense, and that gets really tough.
There's a chapter in the book titled Red COVID that really resonates in Arizona. We have one of the highest COVID death rates in the country. What is red COVID? It's not a scientific term, it's your term. What is red COVID?
Well, actually, a term, it's not my term. It came from an article written by David Leonhardt of the New York Times, but I agreed with it, and it's based on real data. This is an analysis that was started by Charles Gaba, the health analyst, but it's been reproduced by the New York Times, by Axios, by National Public Radio, and tragically it shows that after vaccines became widely available in the spring of 2021, March, April, May 2021, almost all of the deaths were among people who refused to get vaccinated despite the availability of vaccines, and it was very much along a partisan divide. Almost all of those deaths were in red states, red being Republican, blue being Democrat, and the redder the county, the lower the immunization rate, higher the death rate, hence the name red COVID. And it's tough to talk about, right? Because our training as physicians and scientists says, you ordinarily don't talk about Republicans and Democrats and liberals or conservatives or red states or blue states. But the numbers are so striking, it's hard to avoid. And the point is, this did not happen because, Brahm, this did not happen because of misinformation or the infodemic. It happened because of a predatory, targeted, deliberate disinformation campaign that came from, unfortunately, the extremist elements of the Republican Party. It came out of the CPAC conference of conservatives in Dallas in 2021 in the summer. As that Delta wave was unfolding, as vaccines became widely available that were 90% protective, the rhetoric was first they're going to vaccinate you and then they're going to take away your guns and your Bibles. And as ridiculous as that sounds to us, people in my state of Texas, your state of Arizona, accepted it, and they brought on all the prominent anti-vaccine activists. There was a well-known article about it called They Clapped at Death. I mean, that's how awful it was. Then the pylon came from members of the House Freedom Caucus in the Congress. Senator Rand Paul piled on, Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, and then Fox News every night filled their content with anti-vaccine content. And this was documented by two groups, Media Matters and a watchdog group and a research university in Switzerland, documented Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, filled their broadcasts every night during that Delta wave with anti-vaccine content, and people bought it, and they died because they refused to get a COVID vaccine. It's not that I care about your political ideas. That's your business. That's your right as an American. But how do we, and this is the hardest part of all, how do we uncouple the anti-science from this to say, look, you're entitled to your political beliefs, but don't pick up this one because it's going to kill you. And it was so tragic to watch this happen.
Okay, so I'll ask you to answer your own question. How do you do that? How do you uncouple it? There's a generation of scientists working now, future scientists, that probably needs to know.
Yeah, and I'm about to give you the longest, I don't know the answer to your question answer I'm going to give, because the health sector, the scientific sector, doesn't know what to do. I mean, we can certainly do things to talk to the heads of the social media companies, maybe switch up computer algorithms so things don't go as viral. We can try to up our game in terms of amplifying, positive health benefits of vaccination and information, and that's what everyone's trying to do. It's only getting us about 20% of the way there because there is this predatory disinformation campaign. And now it's not stopping. Now that after ultimately 40,000 Texans needlessly died because they refused the COVID vaccine during the Delta BA1 waves in 2021, 2022. 200,000 Americans died. 200,000 Americans died because of anti-science aggression, which is what I call it. And now that that's happened, it's not like there's this pause for self-reflection. What you're seeing is those same predatory groups are doubling down. Now they're trying to say it was the vaccines that killed Americans, which is absolute nonsense. Or they're trying to say scientists invented the virus. And you're seeing this play out now on these phony House GOP subcommittee hearings. They're trying to blame the vaccines or say the science created the virus. Their official Twitter site actually says they're going to sell popcorn. They're not even pretending this is anything other than political theater or Fox News Southwest.
But then, as you talk about political theater by Republicans, doesn't that leave you open to criticism? You're just anti-Republican?
Yeah, it's really tough. And what I say is, look, I'm actually politically quite moderate. I moved to Texas 12 years ago and got to know, great people like Secretary Baker, Jim Baker, his wife Susan, and that was never an issue. It's how do you this new generation stuff that's coming on, and targeting the science and scientists and bringing on all these unqualified people as talking heads that are just making things up. That's what gets scary.
You wrote that, I will never forget the year 2021. You swung from anger and grief as the pandemic death toll climbed in 2020 to disgust and anger in 2021. What explains, and you write how at some points you would come to tears on TV. What explains the swings in those emotions?
Yeah. It was really interesting. I mean, things got so sad when you were seeing so many people on their deathbeds in intensive care units because they refused the COVID vaccine. And they ranged from remorse, oh my God, I should have gotten vaccinated, or for the saddest of all is, okay, now I'll get vaccinated. That's not how vaccines work. You need time to induce an immune response to prevent you from getting it. They're not therapeutic. All the way to people and not even being able to die with dignity. Their last dying breath was saying this whole thing is a hoax. And that was devastating. And yeah, I did tear up a few times talking on TV. And first I thought, oh my God, there goes the end of my brief TV career. And it turned out people appreciated the authenticity. They wanted to see physicians, scientists who actually cared about what they were saying.
And where are you now? As you look ahead, there's going to be another pandemic.
Yeah, this is unfortunately only the beginning. Remember, we've had 3 major coronavirus pandemics in the 21st century. We had the original severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, in 2002. That also came out of China. Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome in 2012 out of the Arabian Peninsula. COVID-19. We know what's next. We're going to have another major coronavirus pandemic before the end of this decade, before 2030. We're going to have zoonotic influenza illness. We're going to have arboviruses, mosquito-transmitted viruses, because of that combination of climate change. We're seeing that now on the Gulf Coast. So, you know, put your tray tables in the upright position and your seats forward and your seatbelts on, because this is unfortunately a new wave of pandemics is going to be upon us because of that combination of 21st century forces of climate change and urbanization and human migrations.
And you say that basically it's up to scientists to take on this fight because nobody's coming to our rescue. Who should be coming to the rescue?
Well, here's what we need. We need to have that recognition that COVID-19, unfortunately, could be just a warm-up act, that there are far worse pandemics that could be upon us. So now's our time to be building capacity to fight it, ramping up our ability to make vaccines, enabling the virologists to do the surveillance. But unfortunately, what you're starting to see now is this revisionist history that wants to blame the virologists for creating the pandemic. So instead of containing the viruses, we're containing the virologists, and that's going to have tragic consequences. And we've got to figure out a way to overcome the anti-vaccine sentiments. I mean, look at what's happened now with these new boosters. So last year there was a bivalent booster that came out. Fewer than 20% of Americans got that. Now, with this new annual immunization for the XBB variants that are currently circulating, that became available in September. I mean, I got it, and about 6 other Americans got it, but you know, that's what we're looking at, really low numbers, so that when the next pandemic comes, what I'm worried about, it's going to be something like that. People are going to be holding back, and that will also come back to bite us.
Dr. Peter Hotez, thank you so much for the work you do.
Thanks, Brahm, for giving this attention. I appreciate it.